So hello everyone and welcome back to episode 35 of the Deercast, really racking up the numbers now. Back by popular demand, joining Harry and I on this podcast episode is Paul Hill from Corinium Rifle Range. So welcome back, Paul.
Thank you guys, good to be back again.
You were by far, I think, am I right in saying our most listened to podcast that we did in 2024? But the most listened to of both 2024, but also almost of all time. So that is a pretty big accolade, and we have had a lot of requests to get you back on the podcast. So thank you very much for joining us again.
You're welcome. It's good that your podcasts are getting out there, not just in the UK, but further afield as well. But I think one of the main reasons for that, I'm not kind of blowing smoke at my own backside, as it were, is that we talked about factual stuff rather than me. I don't need to kind of give you any insight into what I do and what I've done in the past. I'm not interested. It's not what your listeners, I don't think, are interested in. They want factual information that gives them an insight into what they need to know going forward.
I think you're absolutely on the money there. The number of questions we had through afterwards asking about ammunition bits and pieces. And to be honest, and this is kind of a bit of a public apology, I didn't forward all those questions to Paul because he would have been in front of his computer or phone for months answering all the questions. But I think we've kind of stored most of them in the memory bank, and we'll probably try and get through some of them today, if that's okay, Paul.
Pleasure. Absolutely. Yeah, fire away.
I mean, but before we get too far, we were actually just discussing Harry's brother's new rifle, so Bobby's new bit, the 270, weren't we? And the ammunition he's chosen to go for, because you were saying it's the 270 is a bit of a sledgehammer, isn't it, Harry?
Yeah. I mean, I've seen it in action in Scotland and always been very impressed. Bobby, if you haven't seen the YouTube series, go and watch it. He's bought himself a nice 270, and we've shot some rangy fallow with it, and it's performed incredibly well. And we were just talking about the Seiko Blade 2, which is Seiko's newest edition of their copper bullet. And Paul, you were just explaining that is it their third go at doing a copper round?
When a lot of these factory manufacturers, initially they were using other manufacturers' bullets. So the first round they had a go at was the Barnes TTSX, and they went down the kind of widely regarded kind of accepted view that if they went light and fast, it would be absolutely fine. But unfortunately, it wasn't, as we've discovered before. I think they went with 110 grain, doing 1,000,000 miles an hour, and it wasn't having the desired effect. They then came out with their own blade, which was a better option, but still they went light and fast. I had some in a 65-55 for a client, and I ended up taking it back to the shop, the shop we deal with, that is, who do a lot of our stuff through. And I'd literally just put it on the counter, and this voice from behind me said, "So you don't like it then?" I won't reply what I said, but it was something like, "No, it's not very good." And he said, "Why did you say that?" So I gave him the full chapter and verse and what we'd found over many, many years of trial and error. And he said, "Well, it's funny you should say that, because they're about to release their third bullet." And it happened to be the GMK rep. So we got chatting about it, and what they'd done was actually realised that they'd gone heavier for calibre, they'd slowed it down a little bit, and they'd also widened the hollow point at the top. So it's a much, much, much bigger cavity now. So when the plastic bit snaps off, which it invariably does, you're exposed to a massive hollow point, which is very much like the Fox bullet. And lo and behold, it worked. Surprise, surprise. But there is one small limitation, which they haven't found yet, but RWS have. And if you look at a brand new box of RWS and a box of Seiko at the same time, you will see that the RWS has a maximum distance on it, whereas the Blade doesn't. And that's my only criticism. They need to get their head around the fact that some of these rounds, particularly the 308, which they've gone up to 162 grains now, perfect weight for that, it's akin to that RWS 165, so they're there or thereabouts. But RWS have put a range limit of 170 meters for the effective range of that bullet, whereas Seiko haven't. So people do need to be aware that when they're shooting over longer distances, if they're doing that, then that bullet is going to drain energy very, very quickly, and it won't have the energy to expand like it needs to.
So This was a question we got asked after the podcast, and I can't remember if we asked it in the last one, so apologies, everyone, if this is a repeat. But someone said, do we need to start thinking about bullets differently in terms of having specific bullets for specific species or specific distances, rather than thinking one thing can just do everything?
Kind of, yeah. Again, it does depend on caliber to a degree. And very early on, when we were starting down the custom route for people, we were asking, what are you shooting and how far away? And it did make a difference, particularly, and I hate to say it, particularly in 308, because it's just got that limitation where, if somebody wants to shoot a big red at 250 meters, they've got to think about a completely different round to shooting roe and munties or even fallow at 100 meters. Apples and pears, completely different. There isn't a bullet on the market that will do everything. The closest we got was the Virtus Precision. That was designed to do both, but even so, at closer range, if you're loading it so you get better performance at longer ranges, at those shorter ranges, you're likely to get much higher carcass damage.
And what are those maximum ranges, like roughly? For a 308, I think you said 160 grain round.
The 308, if you're going heavy for caliber, you've got to bear in mind, you've got to look at that trajectory curve and the energy drop over those distances. And because you can't push it as fast because of pressure restrictions, then it's going to be much closer. And RWS have got it right. They're saying on their box 170, 180 meters, and that is it. That's your limitations. And I know Blaser had these difficulties many years ago. They're up on the Ardnamurchan estate. They're taking 308s. They're shooting 165 grain 308 HIT bullet, and they were getting clean pass-throughs at 250 meters. And they had to understand, and unfortunately they didn't understand at the time because nobody informed them that these were distances in excess of what that bullet was going to be effective at. Wind it back to 175 meters, no problem at all. To get to those longer ranges, you're going to have to look at your velocities, your energies, and your bullet design. So the bullet has to be long and thin, which 130 or 140 grain copper projectile is not. It doesn't have the ballistic coefficient to get to those distances. Therefore, it's not going to have the velocity, it's not going to have the energy at that distance. So it's not going to expand properly.
Interesting. So this is probably slightly unfair because I can't remember if we warned you that this might be a topic we'd bring up, but linked to all of this in the back of my mind is the HSE consultation on banning lead, which Harry and I spoke about I think we was on an episode, just the two of us. And you may or may not be up to speed with it, Paul, but essentially the HSE consultation was advising that we just do away with lead and go with the various alternatives in rifles above, in 243 and above.
Yeah, I mean, it specifically mentions 6.13 millimeters, which is 243. So they're going for it, and it's going to happen. There's no doubt about it. It's happening. So we're all going to have to embrace this. A lot of people have embraced it, and those who've done a little bit of research have noticed no difference whatsoever in using or transitioning from lead to copper. There will be certain instances that it will cause problems, but this is where firearms manufacturers need to step up to the plate as well. Ammunition manufacturers are limited to what materials they can use, and ultimately copper is going to be the one. Now, I think we touched on this in the last podcast. If you look at the periodic table around lead, there is very little that is cost effective to use in replacement for lead. So we're stuck with copper. Copper works, but you have to treat it differently, and you have to understand that until some of the rifle manufacturers start making faster twist rates in their standard barrels, such as your 308s, your 243s, the 30 cals, as it were. But even then, within the 30 cals, you've got your 300 Win Mags, you've got your 30-06s. They will handle a longer bullet. They will handle a heavier for caliber bullet. It's the poor old 243 and the 308 that are particularly pigeonholed when it comes to bullet weights. And I think we touched on this, as I said in the last podcast, that you just have to be aware that the vast majority of people won't be shooting over 200 meters, so it probably won't affect them. If you've got a 243, an 85 grain projectile will work perfectly well on anything up to and including fallow to a degree. If I was shooting big fallow all day long, then I would be moving up to the 6.5 calibers and maybe 7 mils and 3 and 30 cals. The 243 is going to get a pasting, unfortunately. But if you're predominantly shooting roe and muntjac and the odd fallow, then the 243 is still a perfectly acceptable and usable caliber. So the HSE consultation, it's going to happen, guys. You know, we faced this back in 1999 when it was, you know, a ban on lead for wetlands, and there was initial panic. I was a goose guide on the wash at the time, and yeah, there was this knee-jerk reaction. We all panicked, and what are we going to do? We're not going to be able to kill geese at extended ranges. Well, within a month or two, we'd sorted it out. You know, we realised that hand loading was the way forward, or custom loading was the way forward. We're loading steel. Yes, we're shooting BBs and number ones instead of 3s and 4s, but we're knocking geese down. So there are alternatives. It just requires a little bit more thought and consideration and getting advice. And this is the thing we found most difficult over the last year since we've done that last podcast, is that people still aren't being able to source the correct information. And they're buying ammunition, it's expensive. They are taking what's on the shelf. They're taking what the factory manufacturers are putting out, which is one or so options. You know, you can't, there are very few manufacturers out there who supply more than one lead-free option. It's my way or the highway sort of thing. You know, this is our option, go out and use it. And if it works for you, good. If it doesn't, bad luck. And I think there has to be a little bit more input from both the firearms manufacturers in looking at some of the standard calibers and looking at the twist rates to enable them to use a heavier for caliber bullet, such as the 308 and the 243, or the ammunition manufacturers. But the ammunition manufacturers they've kind of gone as far as they possibly can because they are governed by proof restrictions. So I think the next step is for the firearms manufacturers to start looking at the twist rates in their standard barrels. And, you know, instead of being a 1 in 10 or a 1 in 11 for 308, it used to be 1 in 8 now. The same with the 243. Forget the 1 in 10s or 1 in 11s. You're looking at 1 in 8. So you can use a 100-grain copper bullet, and that will change the dynamics of this thing overnight.
And
So,
sorry.
So really quickly, because we've had this question a few times, and it's just sprung into mind. For some of our listeners, can you explain twist rates? Because a few of them got in touch after the last podcast, and I did a horrendous job of explaining it. Some of them have probably told them completely the wrong version.
Okay, right. A twist rate is the speed at which, effectively translates to a speed at which the bullet will rotate and the distance it takes to rotate one full revolution in a barrel. So they're expressed as a ratio, 1 in 8, 1 in 9, 1 in 10. That's one complete revolution for the number of inches in the barrel it travels to complete that one revolution. So a 1 in 10 will travel 10 inches of barrel for one complete revolution. Okay, that's the basis of a twist rate. Now, twist and spin effectively is, and the twist rate is the spin that the barrel will impart to the bullet. And spin is stability. Now, bearing in mind, as the bullet gets heavier, it gets longer. And a long bullet needs a faster twist rate generally to stabilize it. And stability is accuracy. It's as simple as that. So let me take a classic example. Tikka manufacture their 223 rifles in 1 in 8 and 1 in 12. And that's because 223 is a popular caliber for target shooting. However, if you take a 1 in 12 twist rate, Tikka, and put a 70-grain match bullet in it, you'll get triangular holes in the target, or at best, a 10-inch group. If you then put a 45-grain bullet in it, which is designed to shoot in 1 in 12, you'll get your typical cloverleaf accuracy. Flip it on the other side and put a 45-grain bullet in a 1 in 8 twist barrel. The bullet's going so fast and spinning so fast, it may not even make the target. It may disintegrate mid-air because that is designed to shoot a long, thin bullet. Accelerate it, spin it fast, give it stability. Does that help?
Yes.
Okay,
So effectively, the argument against having more spin on a bullet is that the more spin a bullet has, the more propensity it has to basically disintegrate, and I guess that then reduces velocity as well.
Well, it won't. No. The faster the twist rate, it will increase the velocity because it's speeding up as it goes down the barrel. But then you're down to barrel length as well, and powder burn. There's all sorts of ballistic things in here which will affect that. But to the layman, let's just say that if you think about the length of a copper bullet, a 100-grain copper bullet will be significantly longer than a 100-grain lead bullet because copper is less dense than lead. So therefore, that longer bullet requires greater twist rates, faster twist rates to stabilize it. Is that easier?
Yeah, no, that makes total sense.
Which this is where the light and fast argument came from initially. You know, 130 grain lead-free bullet will probably be the same length as a 150 grain lead-free bullet.
Yeah.
Okay. So you'll get the same stability.
If manufacturers all move to 1 in 8 twist rates, or you know, for whatever caliber 308, let's say, does that then preclude you from shooting accurately with lead ammunition?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily, but bearing in mind that the HSE have recommended we phasing out lead ammunition, so lead's toast anyway. So if you're going down the copper route, you know, you either need to be looking at calibers that are used to shooting or are designed to shoot long, thin bullets, your 270s, your 7mm, your 38.6s, or your 6.5s, or you look at the ammunition manufacturers and shoot and find a faster twist rate barrel that will handle copper initially better because it's spinning it faster, so you can go for that longer bullet and therefore go slightly heavier caliber. So let's take the 162 grain blade, the 165 grain HRT in 308. Now they are limited on their distances because the bullet isn't spinning fast enough, so you can't make it go fast enough. So if you make it go faster and spin faster, you get better ballistics over longer range.
There you go. Mind blown.
Yeah.
So, well, slightly caliber related or slightly bullet related, but slightly unbullet related. You mentioned it. Obviously, been a while since we last caught up, or since we last recorded a podcast. We're recording this at the end, well, pretty well the end of March. So I think since we last spoke, we've got a full doe season under our respective belts.
Yep.
I think.
Yeah.
I think I'm right in saying. And I think we were all chatting on WhatsApp the other day and possibly saying that we've all seen and experienced some interesting or different things this doe season, which probably sounds slightly cryptic, but I thought we might elaborate on for our listeners.
Yeah, it's about time somebody lift the lid on the whole fallow thing. I've done 2 level 1 courses in the last 2 weeks, and I invariably spend an awful lot longer on fallow now than I do any other topic. And I have the photos to prove it. And we're not talking what's happened in the last 2 or 3 years. We're talking what happened 20 years ago, and it's been going on for the last 20 years. And, you know, invariably I'll have a dozen candidates sitting there, open-mouthed, aghast at what I'm showing them. It's not just what I'm telling them, it's what I'm showing them on slides, you know, extra images I put into level 1 to just highlight the problems we are having with fallow. And most interestingly, on this last course, we had a big farmer from down in Sussex where there's enormous problems with fallow, and he was hearing the same things that I've been saying could happen. And it was, I can't say too much because, you know, kind of client confidentiality and what have you, but he was kind of regurgitating ideas and things that had been said to him that I said I feared would happen in the fallow industry, as it were, not just the deer industry, particularly the fallow industry in the coming years, which worries me enormously. And if you want to talk about it, I'm happy to, but it's a major concern for me.
So, I mean, what I'm personally sitting and quite happy to kind of lift the lid on is, and I shot one last night, to be fair, is I'm seeing some really, really small fallow running around. Like last night, I would describe as like an infant group that I sort of like came across of 3 or 4 little, almost sort of like fallow fawns that had been left by presumably their mothers whilst they went off to feed somewhere else. I took the biggest one out of the group, and I think it weighed 14 kilos, dead weight. And then 2 weeks ago, similarly, I shot a pricket that weighed 12.5 kilos.
Brilliant. Well, if you remember about a month ago when we were discussing this podcast, I sent you a photograph, and there were 2 fallow fawns shot on the same day in January. One was 21 kilos and the other was under 10 kilos. Now, I know for a fact, and I've watched this, and do your internet research, and this goes to all the listeners out there, do your internet research, okay? What controls fallow does coming into estrus? What makes them come into estrus? Day length. Okay, it's daylight hours, all right? Same with testosterone in bucks. Now, I've seen this, I've watched it through the spotting scope at the range, in the field behind the range. Fallow does will breed from September through to February. Fact, they will. They will conceive if they have a threshold body weight, which will allow them to come into estrus and hold, they will conceive quite happily in February. Bearing in mind the estrus cycle and the gestation periods, that fallow doe is then going to give birth that youngster in October. October to January, there's where your 10 kilo fawns come from. That's where your 12 kilo fawns come from. And that's what's happening. I can assure you, I've watched it with my own eyes. I have photographs. And we're not talking the last couple of years, Tom. We're talking the last 15 to 20 years. I've watched this. Only 2 years ago, I had a very experienced deer manager from the Stroud Valleys came to see me with similar photos. And he was asking exactly the same questions. I pulled out my level 1 kind of portfolio and the images I used for people, and I showed him. And the penny began to drop. There are younger animals breeding, and this is just purely down to poor management. This is people shooting bigger fallow bucks. This is younger bucks being pushed away. You know, it's very similar structure in a buck group to that of a wild boar sounder. If you shoot the lead sow in that, the matriarch sow in that, it'll disperse the sounder, and you'll have 3 or 4 females then breeding. It's the same thing with fallow bucks. If you shoot the bigger animals, there's nothing to contain the breeding potential of those youngsters, those smaller fallow bucks. And only last year, and I so wish I'd videoed this for people to show them. I watched a fallow pricket covering 6 does 200 meters behind the range backstop in February last year. There you go.
I've got to admit, when you first told me about this theory, I was skeptical. And then this season, I've had quite a lot of very small youngsters, and the first couple I sort of thought, oh well, maybe they were the ones whose mums I shot in November, as in like the 1st of November, and therefore they've just never really pushed on.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, the one I shot a couple of weeks ago, the pricket was there with its mum, and it was 12.5 kilos.
Yep, there you go. It's been happening for years.
And can you just explain in a bit more detail why shooting mature fallow bucks has that effect in terms of the mechanics of how that actually works?
It's if you look through all the deer species, maybe not Chinese and muntjac, but if you look through the main species, your roebucks, fallow, seeker, and red, if you manage the males correctly, and we're talking about correct management here, the males will always fight off and keep away the younger animals. It's a hierarchy thing. It's a body weight thing. Only this year we had a big fallow buck, and he'd been pushed off a rutting stand. I saw him on one afternoon, and I couldn't understand why such a big fallow buck, and he was a monster. Honestly, I mean, there's a story to this. It's a great story. But he was on his own, and I looked at him, and I don't usually shoot bigger animals. I won't shoot them because I know what happens, and I didn't shoot this animal, so I left him. I went away, and I puzzled on why that animal wasn't on a rutting stand at the end of October. And then I went again, probably 10 days afterwards, and I took a client with me this time. He's a friend client, and he'll never forget this until the day he dies. But right at last knockings, he came back into the plantation, and I said to him, if we see him again, I'm taking him, because I'd worked out what had happened. He'd been pushed off a rutting stand. Body-wise, he wasn't the biggest, but heck, he was enormous. Probably one of the biggest fallow bucks I've seen in 15 years. He was huge, but he'd been pushed off a rutting stand, and he was mobile. We were watching him through the thermal, and he was covering almost miles of an evening on my own plantation and the neighbouring plantation, and he was covering miles. There were bucks everywhere. He was bringing in does, but he was off a rutting stand, and he was kind of mobile, as it were. Anyway, last knockings, he comes walking up the ride towards us. The client had my rifle, and he was walking towards us, and I was just whispering to the client, I said, he'll keep coming, he'll keep coming. Eventually he will stop, he'll look at us, drill him straight to the front of the chest. Now he's got about 70 meters to go at a walking pace. I've got the place on the wall he's going. I'm thinking, can I get him back from the taxidermist in time for Christmas? It was perfection. He stopped, he looked up, and I just whispered to the client, I said, take him now. Click. No bang.
Lovely.
Oh my God. So I reached forward, I recycled the chamber, load another round, he'd heard, he was off and running. And I will never, ever forget that animal. You know, I was looking at it through the binoculars. It was looking at me in the eyes. Honestly, this was unbelievable. The following morning, I could not work out, well, all that night I was ruining it. I barely slept that night. I could not work out what happened. It was my sow 404, and I could not work out what happened. So I took it to range the following day, tried to replicate it. I could not get that thing to misfire. So I rang Blaser and I had a long conversation, and they said the only way that rifle will misfire is if the bolt isn't down fully. By giving him the rifle, I loaded the round, I passed him the rifle, it had to be. But I think, and when we chatted it through with Blaser, and I think as he pushed the safety catch off with his thumb, the decocking lever, like on a Blaser, his right hand, his finger slipped under the bolt and just lifted it 2 or 3 mil. And if I did that, I could get to misfire. I'll never forget that, ever. I won't either. But that was an animal that you could shoot off the rutting stand because he was past his prime and being pushed off. When people shoot bigger fallow, you lose the hierarchy immediately. Now, when it comes to the rut, that hierarchy is very, very important. It's the same with roe, it's the same with reds, it's the same with seeker. If you shoot a dominant animal, it will allow other animals, younger animals, not breeding quality animals, to step in and take its place, but not just one, several. And that's what we're having. Same with roe. You know, I urge people, if you've got cull bucks to shoot them soon. Shoot them April, May. Well before we get to the rut, shoot them early on. You reduce the amount of damage they'll do. If you only got one big animal, territorial animal, doing some damage, it will reduce the amount of damage it's going to do. You're always going to get damage. And this is where, you know, I talk to people about managing the landowners. Landowners have got to understand that if bigger animals are shot, there's no such thing as a no deer policy. Nature abhors a vacuum. If you shoot a big buck, you'll have loads of little ones come in. The minute the does come into season, or sorry, not into season, should I say, the minute the does start becoming territorial, they'll push their youngsters away. And those youngsters have got to find a territory, and they'll try and find a territory as close to them as possible. And if that territory has a bigger buck in, he's then protecting that territory from all the youngsters. You'll see more damage from youngsters, you'll see more damage from the older animals. And landowners have to understand that you can't not have deer. If you've got deer in an area, you're always going to have deer. You're better off with bigger, better quality animals who will do less damage, better genetics, and so forth. And that is the problem. It doesn't matter if it's roe, red, fallow, or muntjac. If you shoot those bigger, mature animals, you will open the door for all the younger animals to push forward, the lower quality animals, the poorer quality animals, to breed with the females. And that is when you'll get split groups. You'll get what we call perturbation, where you push animals away through pressure, and they'll go off into little satellite groups. It may be a younger buck and younger does, like you're seeing, and there's your problem.
So is the problem people shooting the big fallow bucks, or the sort of dominant fallow buck in or around the rut, basically?
No, it's all year.
No,
it's all year.
All year.
I will not watch this site, but Sally watches it to make sure that we're not mentioned on it and what have you. It's some Facebook thing, Deer Stalking UK, or I can't remember. It's some, I think that's what it's called. But from the 1st of August, you will see photographs of big, mature, good quality palmated bucks dead from August the 1st onwards in the coming season. And that's your problem. I hate to say it, you know, hopefully your listeners are, because they listen to you, they are better versed, you know, they are more interested in management rather than just the shooting side of things. But I see it every year, and it absolutely boils my you-know-what. It really does. You know, you just shot a prime animal way before it should have been shot. Now, how can you identify in August if that animal's ready to be shot or not? You can't. You haven't watched it for 10 years. You haven't watched it for 5 years. You know, you haven't watched it mature from a decent pricket through all its heads to get to that point to become a breeding animal, and it's dead on the ground. Some of these things are even in velvet, you know, it's that early on. And it's just poor management. It's just greed. It's just trophy hunting at its worst, frankly. And we've been seeing it for many, many, many years. You know, this is not a new phenomenon. It's been going on 20 plus years, this, Tom.
And when do you think that really started? Like, you know, you say sort of 20 years. What's to say that hasn't been happening for longer? Do you think it's just because of the popularity of stalking? And
I was going to say, it's probably happened more, Harry, in the last 10 to 15 years. As the popularity of stalking has got more and more, we've seen more of it. And, you know, I talk the two species I concentrate on more than anything else when doing a level 1 are roe and fallow. Roe don't need a lot of management, but they need careful management. And the same goes for them as goes for fallow. Because stalking has become so popular, and because roe are quite stupid deer, let's be fair, they're not difficult to stalk roe. They're territorial, you'll always find them, but unfortunately their body weights have gone down over the last 15 years. You know, regularly, all the bucks we were shooting, mature bucks, were 20 kilos plus, clean weight. I haven't a 20 kilo plus roe deer for 10 years. You know, now they're 17, 18 kilos, and that's because people are shooting them too young. They see a 6-pointer, they shoot it. It goes on the wall. Or worst case, or worse than that, is, you know, it's this, well, if I don't shoot it, somebody next door will shoot it. You know, this mentality that stalkers have, you know, that, oh, these are my deer. While they don't belong to anybody, you know, one of the things we major on when we're doing a level 1 course is talk to your neighbours. Have a policy, have a management policy, you know, have all sorts of policies, have road traffic accidents. You know, what happens if you get a wounded animal on your ground? You need to be able to go into next door's ground to retrieve it or to shoot the animal again. You know, but in that comes a strict management policy. We've got a big 6-pointer. Let's see how he grows over the next 2 or 3 years. If he makes nothing, shoot him. But, you know, I go back to a classic example. The only bit of ground I've got where I took you, Tom, for your level 2. I've had that ground here 20 years. And when I inherited it, there was nothing good on there. It was all absolute garbage. There was nothing worth shooting on there at all. So being kind of fairly early on in my stalking career, 20 years ago, I decided I'd have a bit of an experiment with roe deer. And I shot every roebuck on sight. If it didn't have 6 points, I shot it immediately. Didn't question it. Even the poorer quality stuff, you know, they very poor coronets. You could see there were older animals, but poor, some going back. I shot the lot, and I kept shooting and shooting and shooting. And it took me till 2016, 17, I think. So probably 10 years of shooting rubbish. And I was out in mid-August. I didn't expect to see anything. I had a client with me, and I had the call. I squeaked it, and a youngster came tearing in. So I said to him, "You can take that." He shot it, and when I retrieved it from the undergrowth, it was a 6-point yearling. And only very small tines, you know, one, obviously the main beam was very pronounced, but the front tine was slightly pronounced. The rear tine was only just like maybe a centimetre, almost like a brow tine and a muntjac, but it was a 6-point yearling. At that point, I knew we had something better around, some better genetics. So I looked and looked and looked, and I didn't just have one, I had 2. So you don't want 2 big animals in a smallish area, because that's quite a smallish area. I didn't want 2 big animals. One's going to kill the other, worst case scenario. So I decided that the following April, when they came back in season, I would shoot one. April the 6th, 2018. I remember the day well. Lucky Tom, not you, another client called Tom. Call him Lucky Tom because he's shot something with me every single time he's been out. And we're out, April the 6th it was. This animal came out, and I could see it was a big, big, big animal. And I said, take him. He took him, gold medal. I was the biggest gold medal shot in Gloucester that year. And his opposition is still, or was still, he's gone now, but this is some time ago, you know, this is 7-8 years ago, but I've still got the genetics in my roebucks from that, his kind of counterpart, and I'm still getting regular 6-pointers in that area, good young 6-pointers that don't need to be shot. They wander further afield because they're pushed out, and they will get shot. And they'll get shot not by the right people, because they're looking at them and going, oh, that's a nice 6-pointer, looks quite big, but he's probably 3 years old. He's got 4 or 5 years left in him yet, and it's the wrong animals getting shot. Same with fallow. It's the wrong animals getting shot because it looks nice on the wall. That's winding you down.
where do you think this is going? You know, where does this end with this sort of double season and the impact on, you know, on our season that we have for the deer and the legalities of it? You know,
honestly, right now, I can't say this goes no further because obviously this is going onto a podcast. But
only like 4 people listen to our podcast, so this isn't right. Going that.
I've watched a number of views on these things, and I see this sort of stuff. On the last podcast, I mentioned, I didn't actually, I tell a lie. The last level 1 course, sorry, my mistake. The last level 1 course, I was going into my diatribe about fallow and where this, I think, will lead to. The numbers. I mean, if you draw a line from me down through to Kent, you're in the middle of that. You know what the problem is with fallow. I hate to say this, and God, I hope this doesn't happen, but I can see compulsory culling coming along. And I really hope it doesn't happen. When I mentioned that on the last level 1 course, this guy from Sussex said he'd heard it from a very high up source. I won't say in which organisation, it wasn't any of the training organisations, but he'd heard it mentioned by somebody very high up in a big organisation. And I think we could see compulsory fallow culling coming along. And I think it will do the whole fallow population good. Genuinely, I really do. I hope it doesn't come along in the nature scot side of things, you know, where people have got the authority to come onto your land, do a census, impose a voluntary cull, then a mandatory cull, etc. I hope it's done better structured, you know, through the training organisations, etc., and the big shooting organisations. But I've got a horrible feeling that that kind of thing will come our way because the numbers are out of control. And recreational stalkers, God bless them, they cannot possibly do that job. They cannot possibly reduce the numbers to the levels we need them to be reduced to. You know, ask yourself, only last year you were doing a voluntary TB census up in North Oxfordshire. Why? Why? To prove that fallow carry TB. Now this is a little bit out there, but if you prove that a wild population of deer are severely affected and infected by TB, they're carriers of TB, there's every excuse you need to impose a cull of fallow deer. You also get around the fact that they can't go into the food chain, or a food chain issue, because they can't go into the food chain. The TB orders prevent that happening. So you ain't got a problem with worrying what those carcasses are going to go, where they're going to go. They're going to go for incineration. Bingo, it's all there. I really hope it doesn't happen. I genuinely do. It bothers me, but...
Well, there you go.
And if you follow that sort of thought process through to population and the way that we model, you know, fallow populations, you know, if
your estimates could be massively out, couldn't they?
Yeah,
if you're assuming that the deer only breed in the ways our population models have always worked, and the mortality rates are always what they are, and etc., we could be massively out in terms of the number of deer we think we have, and how much they increase year on year potentially.
Massive.
And there's also the aspect of climate change is leading to more extreme seasons. Our winters are potentially getting colder and more violent. If you are having younger animals exposed to the elements in that way, then you know you have that sort of welfare risk as well, don't you?
But they're not, Harry. They're going the other way. They're going the other way. November and December now are not generally cold seasons. They are. It's an extended autumn. We're not getting cold until January, February, March, April. You know, even now at the end of March, and okay, we're in a warmer spell, but you know, another 2 days from now, we're back onto northerly winds, easterly winds, northeasterly winds, cold winds, and it's a long time. It's several years now since we had a warm April. Now, Aprils, by and large, now are very, very, very cold. Now we're getting frosts. We're getting 1s and 2s and 3s in the mornings now. You know, very, very cold. So the seasons. I won't say. I think the season. Yeah, I'm not a big believer in the whole. Well, I'm not a big believer in man-made climate change. Put it like that. But I'm a believer in climate change. It's happening, but it's been happening for billions of years. It's just another evolutionary part of it. But I'll throw something else into the mix here as well. And these are photos that I've had many of for many years. We're talking 15, 18 years. Twins in fallow. Regularly, twins in fallow. You know, when I talk about it and I show people the photographic evidence on level 1 course, I have to drum it into them. The only 2 species for the assessment purposes, the only 2 species that have multiple births, Chinese water deer and roe. You know, but the photos are there. Regular photos, loads of photos of fallow with twins. You know, pregnant with twins. What's to say they won't go full term? You know, some of the body weights we're getting 15 years ago, 45 kilos clean weight in fallow does.
So the other 2 things I've seen in the fallow this season. Firstly, I had my first ever fallow day that I did find. I shot and was pregnant with twins. The other one, which I'm finding, is my carcass weights. And I think I mentioned this on the last podcast. My carcass weights are definitely down year on year. In that last year, I would probably sort of, I don't know, 29 kilos ish. I'm now like sort of 26, 27 kilos, I'd say, on my does this year.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same.
Have you aged any of those animals properly? Have you had a tooth section done?
No.
Might be worth it just to see what the age of those animals are. But again, I've asked this question of a number of people who I regard highly in the stalking industry, and one or two said the same thing. They think those animals are being pushed around a lot more. Last year was a very, very wet year, and they maybe didn't have access to the ground that they'd had access to before, the easy feeding ground. Maybe had to travel further afield, become more transient, kind of not holding body weights as such. Same through the winter. We had an awful year weather-wise last year, and it may have led to more deer being more transient, but it could also be increased pressure on deer, pushing them from pillar to post, as it were. You know, that's only 3 or 4 pounds. If they're a little bit more active, then there's your 2 or 3 pounds quite easily.
Mm-hmm. I think for us, that in my mind is rather unscientifically the conclusion I jumped to, was that they're probably under quite a bit of pressure and just being pushed around quite a bit more. And so that's at this moment, that's what I'd say. Unless they are much younger animals breeding earlier, then could be. But your simple way around that is you get a tooth section done by somebody, and they'll tell you exactly how old those animals are, which will give you your answer. And I think it is, they're being pushed from pillar to post more now because they're under more pressure. The weather situation last year didn't help. So those things combined, I think, has put them under a lot more pressure. But I still believe that fallow are probably the most resilient and the most adaptable species we have in this small island. I really do. And I think that the numbers are just going to build and build and build, and the problems are going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And management has almost gone out of the window. It really has. It's almost impossible to manage fallow now. Almost impossible. I mean, I was accused many years ago. I was accused of permanently damaging the fallow deer population of Gloucestershire. We had a meeting of the Cotswold Deer Management Group, which was quite comical, and there was myself and a local estate, big estate next door, and we kind of gave our numbers to the kind of chairman, and he was a big BDS man. He was very proper about it all, and the big estate gave their numbers. I gave my numbers, and I included other ground, not just the Cotswold ground. And it was one of those slow motion moments where he kind of took his glasses off and pointed at us and said, you two will permanently damage the fallow deer population of Gloucestershire shooting these numbers of deer. I chuckled. The other guy banged his fist on the desk, some expletive, and walked out. I won't go into it and who he was, but I remember that 15 years ago, and here we are now. The same area, the same bit of ground. A good friend of mine has a thermal drone survey business, and he put a thermal drone up one night, and he went from the rugby club in Cirencester, for those of you who know it, along the road called the White Way, and it's only a few miles. It's probably 6 or 7 miles along this road, straight out towards Stole Park and Withington Woods. And in that area, just with the drone width, they counted 1,600 fallow in a night in one pass. That wasn't looking further afield into those estates. That was just on that one pass. I've got to admit, I love stalking them because they are just so clever. And I find when you catch up with one and you make contact with them, it's a real like thrill and achievement because they are so canny.
You feel like laughing. You feel like laughing and going, ha ha, that'll teach you.
Yeah. But at the same time, like when the kind of like sense of achievement is like worn off, it does worry me slightly, because you say, okay, they're almost like the velociraptor of the deer like species. They are that clever that you're sort of like, I'm not sure that you guys aren't going to outsmart us one day. And with breeding patterns like we've just discussed, where does it end?
Well, you know, it's getting late in the evening, and I'm still convinced that fallow live in trees and down badger holes. Convinced of it. You know, I've stalked them and popped my head over a brow, and there's been 20 fallow there. Kind of gone back, put the bipod down. 30 seconds later, popped my head up, and they disappeared completely, vanished. They are the most intriguing, annoying, difficult species. They really are, and their survival, their ability to survive in different environments, and you know, if they're breeding more than once a year. I'm not saying they're all breeding more than once a year. I'm just saying they have the potential to breed, and I've seen them doing it. If they're dropping twins, then we're in a lot of trouble. A lot of trouble.
So, can I ask probably what will be, I suspect, the last question of the night, because we've kept you for almost an hour so far, Paul. And again, this is probably an unfair question because we haven't warned you about this, and it might put you on the spot. But a new rifle was recently released by Mauser.
Yep. The M25.
Yeah. Well, and the chap sitting to my right, which for those of you listening to this on a podcast, you won't realise who that is. But it is Harry. I think has got a bit of a soft spot for it, and we're hoping to have a look at it at the stalking show and see what we think.
Well, I've had hands on. It's it's a big jump for such a traditional company business name like Mauser to make. You know, from your Mauser M98, your traditional kind of Mayfair Axons, to the MO3, the M12s, M18s, to a straight pull. It's quite a big jump. I haven't shot one. I've had a play with one. I've had hands on. Yeah, I mean, I can't say. All I can say is I've watched a couple of video reviews which looked very favourable. With the Mauser pedigree, you know, with the name comes a pedigree, and with that pedigree comes a name synonymous with reliability, ruggedness, accuracy, dependability, all the kind of buzzwords that you want in a rifle. And I can't see a company like that releasing something that's not going to work. I mean, looking at if you look at the whole stable, you know, the whole Blaser, Mauser, Sauer stable, you know, there's nothing really wrong with any of them. The only one that really never took off was the M18, and that's because it was just purely too basic, I think. It shoots, you know, from the number we've had through the range, they shoot. There's nothing wrong with them, but they are seriously basic. I think the M25 pitches right in there, and I think it will divide opinion, no doubt. You know, there are the straight pull users and the straight pull haters. In terms of the straight pull itself, it's a little bit slicker than the regular R8 in that the bolt will slide forward of its own volition, tilt the rifle forward, it will close, whereas the R8 will hold back. I doubt it would chamber around on its own. It will hold back on the round. But yeah, I think it's possibly worth a look. But I think some of these things, I looked at the mounting system. It's a little bit over-engineered. You know, it's a little bit like the Sauer 404 mount. Any mount that comes with 3 Allen keys and recommends the use for gunsmith and some Loctite, it's a definite over-engineering. You know, if you look at where the 505s come in now, it's gone to the Blaser mounting system, which has been around the thick end of 40 years. So that tells you that is a mounting system that is absolutely bomb-proof, and it is. The Sauer Universal mount has always been a little bit of a kind of a love-hate arrangement. And I've not really taken the M25 to pieces and had a really good look at the mounting system, but it does seem a little bit on the complex side, or more complex than the new Sauer 505 mount and the R93 R8 mount. Sorry. So yeah, I mean, it will appear to some people it fits in a price bracket. You know, it's not quite 505 money. Obviously, it's not M12 money. I mean, the M12 is a work of art. When they released that rifle, I mean, a bit of a shout out to Rupert at RJ Blackwell. He gave me one for the range. I took it away, and I just sat looking and thinking, how on earth can they make a rifle for this kind of little money? It's such high quality.
Yeah.
Basically, it's not a threaded barrel. It's a you know, so a fusion barrel. It's kind of, I don't know how they do it. It's one's very hot, one's very cold. They fuse it in there. But I've yet to see a bad M12. You know, it's look at it like the Tikka T3. I've yet to see a bad one. They all shoot. And you've got a pedigree behind you. The M12, in terms of quality, feel, and finish, is streets ahead of the Tikka. Streets ahead. So how they make it for the money, I don't know. And that's, you know, shout out to the old CEO Robert Sagis. That was his baby, and fair play to him. Kudos, he got it right first time. The M25, I think, is the next level, and it's it's a very different straight pull. We've had various straight pulls over the years. The R93s, Strassers, Lynx. I'll say the Beretta. I won't say my comment on the Beretta, but let's just stick to making shotguns and pistols. But you know, by and large, you know, the straight pull market has been dominated for many years by Blaser, undoubtedly, and rightly so. You know, those guys, I have to say, they are just an enigma to me, Blaser. They really are. I love them to bits. They've looked after me very well for many years. I've got loads of their rifles, and I love them to bits. Sauer 404 is my personal rifle for Africa and what have you, but they've got it right. They don't release something unless they get it right. And I'll be honest with you, the only thing they didn't get right with the 404 and the 505, they didn't make provision for a proper bipod. You have to buy the super duper carbon fancy bipod for many hundreds of pounds. You know,
And even they aren't brilliant.
Well, I've drilled. No, they're not. They're garbage. Also, I didn't say that. They're not as acceptable, or they're not quite as good as the regular stalking bipod.
They're too far away. You can't even adjust the legs.
Yeah.
And on my one, because I've got a 404, but I've got a heavy barrel. The fore end will touch the barrel with a bipod that far forward.
Yeah, but all you have to do, like I did, was drill a hole in your stock at the fore end and fill it with epoxy, and you can put a bipod stud in it. But I got telling off for that, so I shouldn't say that. But you know, that's the only thing I've overlooked in all the time I've been dealing with Blaser, Mauser, and Sauer. That's the only thing that they've ever overlooked, and that's only because they don't shoot off a bipod in Germany. And you know, at the end of the day, if you don't like it, go and buy something else. And that, unfortunately, and I hate to say this because I love them to bits, that is very much their kind of ethos and attitude. If you don't like it, buy something else. I won't recount a story. Well, I will. Bit of fun here. Many years ago, I was helping them out on a game fair stand, and we're going back, 12 or so years. And I won't say who it was in the Blaser hierarchy, but I was on the stand at the game fair, and this certain individual was talking to a potential customer, and the potential customer was kind of balking at the price a little bit. This is when the R8s were only, I think they were only about £3,000 then, quite cheap comparatively. And he said to the potential customer, "I perfectly understand if you find it too high in price. I understand that Tikka make fine rifles. Their stand is down there on the right-hand side," and pointed to the Tikka stand, the GMK stand. And I stood there thinking, did I actually just hear that? But that's their ethos. If you don't like it, buy something different. So I can imagine the M25 is going to be a big hit. In all fairness, Harry, from what I've seen early on, they feel good. They feel well made. Reliability wise, I couldn't tell. I've not had one on test yet, so I couldn't tell you. But I'm sure they will be very, very good.
It sounds as though at the stalking show we need to go and have a look at an M25. Because what are you thinking? Are you going to chop out a rifle, get another rifle? What are you?
I'm thinking about it. Yeah, I feel like a straight pull to add to the arsenal would be sensible. But we'll have to see how it is. Yeah.
Just go Blaser, Harry. Go Blaser, because you will eventually.
That's what everyone says.
I've also got a vested interest in going to the Mauser stand, because I have a real sweet spot for the Mauser M12. Is it the Max? The laminate thumb hole stock.
Yeah.
I have such a sweet spot for it. And as much as I love my Tikka, in some ways I'm sort of willing the Tikka to die one day, die gracefully, so that I can replace it with one of those.
I've had a few Mausers over the years, M03s, M12s, and I recently picked up, or came into my possession, should I say, a lovely M03 in 308, open sights and no moderator on it, wooden stock, ebony fore end, and it's the perfect African rifle. It is absolutely iconic. I've had several M03s. They were, and I shouldn't say this because it sounds a little bit condescending, but the Mauser brand always seems a little bit the kind of British Leyland of rifles. You have the three brands. You have the Sauer, the Mauser, and the Blaser. Well, Blaser, it's like the Merc AMG. You've got 6-foot blonde, muscly Germans walking around in fancy T-shirts. Blaser on the kind of on the breast pocket. You've got the Sauer factory. You've got technicians there. Computer controlled, lots of technical stuff, adjustable triggers. Fancy, one key takes everything off the rifle. Really, really technical. And you've got the Mauser brand, and you've got three blokes in long brown coats, the pencil behind their ear, going, "It's good enough," And that just seems to be the way with Mauser. It'll do. I've had a lot of Mausers need tweaking. No disrespect, they're great rifles. They shoot beautifully. They're heavy. So the M12 was a breath of fresh air. It was the first new kind of Mauser rifle for a long time. Unfortunately, the Mauser M03 is now discontinued, and I've got a lot of converts. I've got a lot of shooters who love the M03s. They really do. But the M25, who knows? It may breathe new life into the brand. I hope it does. I'm sure it'll have a lot of followers, people who maybe want a straight pull rifle but don't want the kind of the stigma attached to the R8 the Blaser R8, because, you know, believe me, there are people who would love an R8, but they just won't succumb to the whole Blaser thing.
It's also the price of them, because I
Yeah.
thought I was going to succumb to the R8 thing. I went on the configurator online, which is such a dangerous thing.
Fatal.
And
Fatal.
yeah,
A very
it would not have been cheap. Let's just put it that way.
One of my pet stalkers, Alex, I won't mention his surname, but Alex, you know, he's out there doing it. He's probably one of the most prolific stalkers, deer shooters I know in the whole country. Big contracts everywhere, a lot of trophy stuff. He's probably one of the best row managers I've ever come across in my entire life. Nobody knows row like Alex, honestly. He can look at a row 300 metres away and go, yeah, it's 6 years old-ish, it's going this year. He's brilliant. And he would decide to treat himself to a new Blaser. So he went on the configurator and he started selecting a few things. 27 grand later, he realised that he was potentially overstepping the mark. I think he'd gone for Stingray leather, grade 15 wood, you name it. It had it on it. This thing, it was properly nasty. So I kind of gave a bit of a word in his shell, like, and he realised he'd overstepped the mark, and he configured himself another one, which is only £17,000 this time. Carbon stock, custom stitching, the Blingser, we called it. It was nasty. He loves it to bits, but it ain't my cup of tea. It's not a working rifle, but, you know, it's the configurator can get you into all sorts of bother. It really can.
Yeah.
But I think you'll be okay with the M25, Harry, if you're going to go down the straight pull route and kind of go away from the Blaser. And I won't say hype, because they are phenomenal rifles, but you know, I do quite happily say it, but they have become something of a status symbol over the last 10 years. You know, 15 years ago, I couldn't give a Blaser away. When I was using R93s, you could not give a Blaser away. They were a proper Marmite rifle. Now they are the must-have accessory.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to get hands-on at the stalking show and see what they're like, and then see where we go with it. But
are you coming to the stalking show this year, Paul?
God, yeah. No. I spend 5-6 days a week talking to people about shooting and stalking, and I fear if I came to the stalking show, the one good thing is most people don't recognise without a cap and in green clothes. So I'd be pretty well incognito. If I took my cap off, I'll probably go unscathed. But I shouldn't say this, but I don't have time. We are just so busy at the range. You know, we were contacted last year and offered a very favourable rate to take a stand. But, you know, I've taken effectively 3 days out, kennel the dogs, accommodation, travel, the stand and what have you. And to effectively sell a product, which is me and the range, that I'm running out of time with anyway, I fear I just disappoint too many people. You know, we're already having to turn people away. We're fully booked through April. May, we've almost run out of bookings. We've kind of created a bit of a monster, if I'm honest with you. So it's difficult to go and sell a product that I can't then offer to people. So if I went, I'd just be going to see trade people there, you know, my trade contacts, and I wouldn't have time to talk to them because they're busy with the general public at the end of the day, which is what they're there for. Much as I'd like to get some
great shame.
Products.
The
new Swarovski scope, the 5-40 by 56, that's an epic bit of kit. It really is. You know, we've supplied a few, so just getting hands on with that would be really nice. But I don't think there's anything there really that is going to kind of tear up any trees for me this year. 1 year I'll go, I'm sure.
Fair enough. Well, when we do tempt you, then you'll have to come and have a beer with us.
Well, if you have a stand there, if you get to the point where, you know, in the industry you actually have a stand there and you're hosting other people like Davana, I mean, we've had some targets off Tom in the last few months. They're holding up pretty well. So, you know, if you have a stand there 1 year, then maybe we'll come and do a questions and answer session for an hour or two and see how that goes.
Epic. We'll hold you to that. But 2026 stalking show, you heard it here first. Paul offered.
Okay. Well, give me a date. Give me a specific date and a time, and I'll see if I'll put it in the diary, and I'll come and take some general questions from the general public for you. How's that sound?
Epic.
Sounds great.
Signed up.
Okay.
As ever, Paul, you've been very generous with your time. Thank you very much. Thank you for putting up with all our questions. And hopefully we've answered for you guys, the listeners, any questions that you had left outstanding after the last podcast we did with Paul. I suspect it may have even raised some more. So if there are, please feel free to email us, send us them on Instagram, etc., etc. The one plea I would say is, please, if you send us a message on Instagram, don't get cross if we don't reply. Sometimes, I don't know why, Instagram just puts them in a pending or requested folder and we don't see them for a while. So please don't get cross. But anyway, thank you. Thank you, Paul. And we'll catch you next time.
You're welcome. And if you have any questions that you feel you can't answer, by all means, pass them on. You know, that's what this whole thing is about, is getting people answers, correct answers to what they actually need, rather than searching on the internet and getting 15 different answers. You know, if we can help in any way, shape or form, please let us.
Brilliant.
Thank you, Paul. See you soon.
Okay, guys. All the best. Take care.
Take care. Bye now.
Cheers. Bye-bye now.